I'm thrilled to be in this venue. I want to let you know I put on my Natural History Museum shoes today. A bit of a risky thing, it's very high, but this is the inaugural voyage for them, so I just wanted to make it special. Thinking about the theme for today, it's about man and machine. I'm going to talk about something that actually involves quite a lot of the machine. There are really three themes that I think are important. Overarching, perhaps, is the idea of complexity. But the first one, and it's really the big one, is around insights. With the advent of AI, machine learning, and data science, we have had to grapple with insights coming at us that are hard to understand. There's a lot there. And I've found the complexity of what's important and how to tell the story to the stakeholders involved in the project is quite a challenge. We're going to go through a bit of that today. The next thing is the technology. For Omnichannel, you have quite a hefty tech stack. We're just going to whiz through that, just to look at the types of data that are being generated by the different types of technologies to tell one kind of holistic picture, or give one holistic picture of a customer experience. And the last thing is automation. I've only just begun on this journey, but we've just at Digitas become partners. We bought actually Epsilon. They're experts in customer relationship management, CRM, but also email marketing. And so I'm starting to work with them to figure out how that part of automation will embed with an overall customer experience journey. So just to kind of give you a sense of who I am. I started life as a designer, graphic designer. I'm quite old, so I've got skills in, cut and paste and the wax machine, rotor rings, and all that kind of thing. But then the internet happened, and I knew that was this was where my soul needed to be. I was always interested in computer science. And so I started working with design companies. I was at an internet startup, and I feel like I invented wireframes because I needed to explain to them how to build interactive navigation, how to lay out pages, etc. But as time went on, I developed my craft. I called myself an information architect then, and I worked my way up. I became head of UX at a number of agencies, and then about 6 years ago, Ogilvy contacted me, and they said, "We'd like you to lead our strategy team." And this was quite forward-thinking of them at the time. I work in health, which tends to be a little bit behind the curve around retail and financial services. And so I made the leap then. I still said, okay, I'll lead the strategy team, but I want to be UX. And they were like, okay, all right. I couldn't quite let go. After that, then I spent a couple of years at a company called W2O, and I worked on the analytics team. I had a passion to understand how to bring to bear all these new insights and overlay them and kind of triangulate, what have you, to make the UX process not just qualitative. I'm old enough to remember the days when we really had to champion against segmentation and say, no, this is not enough. We need the depth. We need to get out to people. We need to do ethnographic research. So for me, it's kind of weird coming full circle back to, okay, now we're back at quant again. And the stakeholders, the business people that I talk to all the time, they really find it compelling, and it's exciting, and it's a new thing. And I feel that we need to still champion the qual piece constantly, but we need to tell them how to weave it in when it's important, when these different types of insights should be brought to bear to tell the stories that we need to tell. So now let's get into the meat of the talk now. So what are design KPIs anyway? I think the most interesting thing about that sentence is design itself. Design is not just an interface. It's not just a logo. It's not just a layout. It's way more than that. And I'm very glad to see that that's coming into common knowledge now, the business narratives, very much. Think about design. It's not just something that you look at. It's actually a process. And McKinsey has invented their design index, and what they've been going out, they're very interested in this now, and showing that the companies that really invest in design are able to grow and give total, higher returns to their shareholders. This tells a very compelling business story. It's something that, business people know about, the Apple, the, I guess, disruptive design around things like Uber, et cetera. This is something that they know, but they don't really understand the components of it. And McKinsey breaks it down into 4 quadrants here. So we've got analytic leadership. It's kind of annoying to me that they put analytical there, because that's the bucket, as we'll see in a second, where the actual design process happens. Cross-functional talent, absolutely about making sure that you've got design leaders in your practice. Continuous iteration, we all know what that's about. And then user experience. So I'd just like to break it down a little bit here. I know it's hard to see, but analytical leadership is creating a bold, user-centric strategy, embed design in the C-suite, and employ design metrics. Cross-functional talent, nurture top design talent, convene cross-functional teams, invest in design tools and infrastructure. Continuous iteration, balance qualitative and quantitative user research, integrate user, business, competitor, and technological research, test, refine, repeat fast. User experience, start with the user, not the spec, design a seamless physical service and digital user experience, and integrate with third-party products and services. So if you think about it, design is not just an interface, it's something that you do. It's something that's embedded in your practice in terms of who you hire, and ultimately, it's a strategy. It's really about what you prioritize, and it's bringing up design thinking and design leaders up the business ladder into the C-suite and making it a priority. I'm working with a company, or because I work with pharmaceutical companies, it's always very hush-hush, but what they're trying to do is similar to what Burberry did. I think many of you will be familiar with the fact that Burberry was a bit of an old fuddy-duddy brand. Their target market was kind of traditional, a bit older types of people, but they were able to, by really understanding the millennial audience, if you will, how to serve them digitally, how to reach out to them, how to invent new digital experiences that actually refresh the brand completely. They were able to become one of the top brands in the UK through this focus. And this is a lovely story that we use often to show how business benefits can be got by paying more attention to the users, to their digital behaviors, and even disrupt it with new ways to bring services. So there's a kind of a tension, always has been, I suppose, between what is UX or customer experience. I'm tending to work a lot in the customer experience space. It feels a little bit more operational. The clients at the other side of the desk tend to be people who have been involved in the procurement of various elements of the tech stack. They are more interested in things like, in my world, if we go out and see reps face-to-face versus how we serve them digitally, how many touches can we do without? Or what is the equivalent metric there to get that prescription written? Ultimately, though, it's accumulation of all of the touch points, and that's where the complexity comes in. I like to think about KPIs in a very granular way. On the left here are the ones that are more operational, and these are ones that will be appropriate for your managers. So these are about executing specific types of things, and it's about how did we do, how well did we perform when we were executing each of these things. Some of the things that we think about is the conversion rate, so whatever the goal is, whatever we're trying to get people to do, how well did that go? And did they engage? Did we get any metrics around that at all? But now this is where I spend a lot of my time now, which is over on the strategic impact space. And this is going to leadership. They don't really want to see an awful lot of analytics or metrics about how well that campaign did. What they're interested in is, did we shift the needle? What activities contributed the most? What do we need to do next? And this is important too, the idea of leading indicators and lagging indicators. So what a leading one is something that you may see in the world that shows the beginning of a journey. A lagging is something like the prescription having been written. That's something that is an output, it's done. What we're very interested in analytics is this idea of predictive models. So what I'd like you to think about is if we can understand this, all of these metrics, how they fit together, how we can maybe start to think about a model that we can make hypotheses, test, and get an output, then that's where we can start getting into predicting the future, which is very interesting to leadership. Now, I think we are very familiar with systems thinking. This is something that we've always had as part of our discipline. And so I think we're very well placed to be the ones who can describe to the business leaders, how we can affect business imperatives and strategic objectives. I like this slide. This is something that I found in the literature. But it tells a story of taking a very narrow view of the system, and you've got your tools. I believe our discipline is very focused on tools and people doing things and tasks. It's got very much that mindset. But then we're also able to think about more broader aspects around the social system. So one of my clients at the moment is involved with medical aesthetics. And so the idea of doing fillers and Botox and that kind of thing. And there's a lot of societal kind of tensions around that. Increasingly, younger women are doing this. It's something that is now being seen a little bit as a grooming thing, something that's preventative, for example. And so these aspects do play a role when you're designing an engagement strategy. So the important thing, however, is to decide and be very clear where you're going to place your marker on this chart. So if you have a specific information system application and you're just there, then it's more appropriate to think about it just in terms of that tool. How well is that tool doing against the things that we want it to do? But if you've got a more broad engagement strategy that will go across many touch points and over time, then you've got to start to think more broadly, and you've got to think more in systems thinking. But the important point is the complexity thing. If it's so complex that you can't form the model and can't start to think about it in terms of hypotheses and outputs, it's too much, so you're not going to be able to get anybody's attention because it's just so really be careful where you place that dot. And I think this may be the most important slide of the whole deck, actually. We've got a lot of lenses in my world. We do product innovation, we design stuff, we design new products, new business models. And when I was at London School of Economics, this is the model that I was taught there. This is the Rogers diffusion of innovation. And this is interesting because it talks about how new technologies are adopted in the marketplace. It's a useful model. So when you're sitting down and thinking, okay, I'm going to plan my metrics, I'm going to plan my strategy here, that lens may be appropriate. There are newer ones, but that is something that's well established, well backed in the literature. And of course, we've got Google's heart. So they've taken it one step further from just general goals and tried to frame it together into a framework, which I think is very effective. I saw a nice case study using that recently. I often get pulled into the marketing funnel, which is pretty simple: awareness, engagement, discovery, etc., through to loyalty. This one is something everybody knows about. So if you want to do a customer journey and it's something that people are grappling with, what's the value of this? Then the marketing funnel is a good place to start. Forrester has published their CX index recently, which I think is quite good. This is something that I've been working with myself. One thing I quite like about it, as a strategist now, it's in sets of threes. Strategists always put things in sets of threes. But they've been quite clever here because they've got 1 3 over here and 1 3 over here, which is possibly why it really resonates with me. But these things over here will feel very familiar to us as UXers. That's what we've been doing since the dawn of time. I think some of these things here are then translating these kind of metrics into something a bit further on, like keeping existing business, retention, then there's the likelihood to do more. We've got the advocacy here, and I like the way that they didn't put the net promoter score there, but they did put it in words. I think we've all grappled with the net promoter score. In some ways, I like the idea of proxies, because what I'm looking for is simplification of story. However, the net promoter score is an awkward metric. You have to ask it, and what does it actually really mean? I think I just recently was caught up in a debate on LinkedIn about the value of analytics. We can't just have what people say, we've got to see what they do. But just what they do isn't enough either. We need to get the combination of the two, because, for example, the experience of the thing may not be optimal anyway, and you're not going to get that by just looking at how people are using it. So I think it's very, very interesting to use this kind of thinking with proxies then for how it may fold into that story. This is something, when I was giving a talk a few months ago, one of my colleagues from Sapient posted this on Twitter, and I thought it was useful, and I thought we should talk about it today. Now, what this is Sapient is talking about loyalty here, which is kind of another world, but it's an interesting world to me because it's about building relationships. And so this little model here, promise me something I need, satisfy my needs, entice me, get to know me, make it easier to satisfy my needs, be in tune with my needs, be attuned to my evolving needs. I think that's quite interesting, because a lot of our clients are saying, we need to build stronger relationships with our customers. And so what does that mean, though? And this is a nice little model that Publicis Sapient use. And they tell us that the majority of retailers are delivering between 2 and 3. So it's, a tall ask. But this is even more interesting, I think. So they put it into 3 buckets. One around the heart. And what's nice about this is that we have a definition, a willingness to consider overall or a specific area of the company. And then we have a role there. That's a leading attitudinal indicator. And then indicative of potential. So this is quite a nice framework, I think. It's broken down in a very simple way, but it talks about that sort of the awareness bit at the beginning of the journey, and then the mind share, percentage of needs addressed. So we're using the system or the engagement strategy, and the context is defining the behavior. A context is defining the behavioral indicator, and that's intent then. And then the realized potential is here. Wallet share doesn't apply for us because it's about doctors prescribing drugs and things like that. But this is absolutely something that would be tied to sales, and so that's often something that you would tie your metrics to ultimately. I'm going to talk you through now the kind of work that we do. We work at a global level. So that means that there's always many countries involved in what we're designing for. This is an OTC product. And the challenge the business has globally is that they are trying to move from face-to-face. So when I worked on this brand a little while ago, what we had to design for was reps going into pharmacies with an iPad. That was as far as the digital went. But now, without those reps, suddenly they're facing challenges around capability. They don't know how to think about digital engagement on one channel, let alone on all of the channels. And so trying to understand how to re-engineer their business to be digital is very much a challenge. It's interesting, though. So in this case, they decided to reduce their sales force by half, and they needed to reach the healthcare professionals, digital channels only. And so the insights that we had access to was they had a lovely insights team. There was lots of stuff, lots of market research, lots of UX user research that we got our hands on that enabled us to really get a grip on these people. But then they had newly invested in machine learning and AI-driven ad serving. So this became a real challenge for us to try and pull together these new crazy big data insights with what we had been given in a typical traditional way. And just to give you the context here, so we've got our potential audiences out there, and in omnichannel experience strategy, we talk about the owned sites, we talk about paid and content marketing, we talk about CRM and email marketing, and then earned around social is something that's very important in my world. So that's your world, that's your universe of touch points, and what you're looking for is loyal customers. So this is the kind of insights. I realize this is very difficult for you to read, but they started working with a new, very innovative startup in Singapore who were able to identify doctors out on the internet. Now, you can do that to a certain extent with programmatic. That's not new, but what is new is the way that they did it. They get data from a data broker. Alexa is where they say they get it, but they also get search data. They get data for numerous sources. They have what they describe as a pipe coming in. And so that whole, they call it topography, really, of the data. Then they apply, they're mathematicians, statisticians, they apply data science methods to identify clusters in all of this. And then from some knowledge points, they are able, so for example, a pharmacist would go to a specific website. They would be able to say, well, that cluster of the audience is likely to be a pharmacist. So then when they have their AI-driven ad serving, that user, they can identify, okay, this is a pharmacist, and then they will show an ad. And so the challenge that we had was that the insights that they get are so broad. So for example, on here, this is for insurance. This isn't one of the projects I worked on, but this has like what restaurants these users like, what life stages, maybe that's more useful, what like cars that they drive, what gadgets they use, their appearance, where they go on holiday. So you can see that what I'm talking about with this complexity of data coming in, of insights. And so it's our job to try and work out, so what does this mean? Does this mean we should be doing a travel application for them? It's very difficult. Certainly, we know that they do like travel, but in the end, the clients said, no, actually, we're just going to keep things quite tight on our product. But this is the opportunity, but also the challenge for the strategists and the people who are designing the strategy. So for example, then, this is kind of the meaty stuff that we could get out of it for our particular audience. So they like tennis, financial news, follows tech stars. They like respiratory content. They visit medical sites, and they visit travel sites. Now, another important thing is getting used to the new vocabulary that the machine brings. And so statisticians will talk about indexes. So it's a very different way of thinking about it, and I had trouble in my team getting people on board. So that index there, like 0.72, that's quite a strong index. That means that compared to the normal population, so you imagine this big data population, these guys index more highly than those do by 0.72%. Visits travel sites a bit. That's a weaker signal. So the vocabulary here, we talk in terms of signal. So is there a signal there? Well, there's certainly a signal around tech stars. So then that can give us some ideas about how we might engage with them. Maybe we'll get some sort of social leader who's a tech star to talk about the domain where these doctors are interested, for example. So then becomes the process where we need to blend everything together. So we're triangulating our qual insights, which we had from the insights team already, and then all of these quant insights. So the attributes associated with this persona, change in perceptions over time is something that we can do over time. Topics, that's a big one for big data. Findings from campaign for optimization, the MPS can fit in there, and then figuring out which of these signals are relevant to help us in our design task. So we would pull these together into a persona. I would absolutely champion the context, because the context and the qual depth insights are what pulls the whole damn thing together, essentially, because otherwise it can feel very fragmented, these bits and pieces that don't seem to go together. So it's very important to craft that narrative. And I wanted to just touch on ideas of journeys, because I've spent a lot of my career making quite fancy blueprints with a lot of detail on them. And they're useful as planning tools, because I can chart out the journeys that the customers, the users go on, and then we can identify opportunities, and it's a nice little framework that works very well. But with the advent of the machine comes a way to look at customer journey analytics. And so I've started to think about this as more of a system, and thinking about data points between two stages of the journey, how I might then measure that, how I might then tell that story about, well, we're getting people from that point to that point with the support of these specific metrics. And this is something that I would love to work with. I've been pitching it to the clients, but it's very new. This is Quantalis, and this is Thunderhead, the talk that I mentioned earlier about the customer. It was actually Google's heart. They used customer journey analytics from Thunderhead to chart that out. It's a visualization tool. So it doesn't actually do any analysis for you. You've got to plug in the right data points. But for me, it's a wonderful way to see which of your personas are doing what. And it's a dynamic system, so you can go and look at it through a dashboard, etc. So what you're looking for there, then, is to define design factors that may contribute to the progress along the journey. Now we come to ecosystems. Has anyone ever seen this? This is Disney's ecosystem from 1957. I think it's not a beautiful piece of design, but it's really interesting to me to see how all of the different touch points pull together to reinforce and drive, essentially, each of the elements of their strategy. So you've got your Disneyland in real life, you've got merchandising, you've got creative talent studio, films, publications, Walt Disney Magazine, comic strips, etc. So it's very interesting for me to see how the thinking around ecosystems all began. We use diagrams more like this now, which shows the elements of the different engagement strategy and how they all play a role to get to, in this case, we were interested in getting people to the health shots hub, because that's where the calls to action that drove the imperatives would happen. Okay, so I promised you we would take a look at a tech stack. So let's just take a quick whiz around this. So you have your engagement channels across the top there: social, email, mobile, web, voice, print, video, reps, interaction and delivery services. We have advertising, we have applications that deliver services. We've got e-commerce that sells stuff clearly, distribution delivered via partners, contact center that answer questions. So you can see all of the touch points in a customer's universe in their interactions with a company are very varied and very diverse. Content engagement management services. So here we've got service and support, CRM, Salesforce, social, email. That's web content management, and then digital asset management. So you've got a lot of support services that are required. And there's ways to think about, well, in content management, that's something that you may want to look at in terms of metrics if you're thinking about your internal teams, or how often things are updated perhaps would be relevant. Enterprise foundation services. So then you've got this journey orchestration and decisioning, which is getting towards the automation that I was talking about, where if something happens, something else happens, or you wait a little while and then something else happens. So you start thinking about that. I actually was working with a company who really specialized in this. They do test drives for Land Rovers, etc. And very interestingly, they were able to plan an engagement journey across 12 weeks that would allow, via email, sending through prompts to do specific actions that would take them towards the buying of a car. And they were scored. Here's the machine coming in again. So if you actually apply for the test drive, that's scored very highly, because that indicates a high intention to buy. Something like watching a video is scored a bit more lower. So that I found that was very interesting to think about the way you can automate, but then also tie in the KPIs. So I'm not going to go through this in a lot of detail because there are specific metrics for each of these, a lot of complexity in it. And so I'd like you to think about how we can then tell the story. I've used the Forrester thing here, and pulling out then the specific metrics amongst all the complexity that will tell the best story for those managers on that side and for the senior leadership on this side. So now, in summary, choose your framework, support it to the people that you're working on the project with, to those business leaders, and tell a business story about the model and the needles you shift, how you plan to attack it with hypotheses, how you plan to drive the outcomes the business is looking for with your framework. Embrace the machine and what it can tell you, but just make sure you still champion our UX methods are still critical. All this kind of disparate, fragmented data is not going to hold together without the glue of really understanding the context that you get from qual. Connect what is important from your qual research to the data points you can measure, being mindful of the fact of the complexity versus simplicity. Lean on the established players who our clients pay attention to for extra proof. So this is the point around using the models like Burberry to show that there is business benefit in design. And those examples will go further than almost anything that you might say. So remember, just finally, our job is to find the simple and the complex. Simplicity is complexity resolved. And that's it.